So it was a pretty day. May 11th, it was May 22nd, 2011. Just a gorgeous day. I don't live too far from here, just about hour and a half or so up in a little town, north of a little town called Joplin, Missouri. And Joplin folks here, all right. It was pretty much a normal day. In my household, my wife and I sometimes will, in a fun, loving way, will argue over who gets to go mow the yard, because when you can put headphones on and listen to whatever music you want and your kids can't ask you for anything, that's a great day. And so we'll argue over who's gonna get to ride the riding lawnmower for a couple hours. And I love mowing the yard. And so that day I was out mowing. And eventually she kind of waved at me and said, hey, you should probably come inside. And I could see a storm was developing. Long story short, this storm develops and it moves into our town back on May 22nd, 2011. That is horrendous. At that point, we got our family down in the crawl space and we turn on the radio and we start hearing things like stores that we would visit on a Sunday, like Lowe's and Home Depot. Home Depot was gone. There's a Walmart that, man, it used to be across the street from a house that I lived in when I was a little kid, and they're saying on the radio that it's gone. They're mentioning restaurants like Pizza Hut and other places that are just gone. And we're sitting there listening to this on the radio, and then our neighbor got a hold of me, and she said, hey, Jayson, my husband called, he's out of town, and she said, can you run in town, please, and check on my mother-in-law? I was like, oh, you bet. So jumped in my truck, booked it into town, and man, as I'm trying to pull into town, it's just, the lights are out everywhere. The electricity's gone, there's power lines down, it's just absolute mayhem. And as you're trying to navigate, you can't see hardly anything at all. It's just dark in this town of 50-some thousand people. You're trying to navigate streets that just have debris everywhere. And I'm taking a truck and I'm putting it four-wheel drive and I'm popping up over curbs and driving through yards, trying to get back to this apartment complex that was right behind this Walmart that I found out eventually was absolutely leveled. I pulled to this apartment complex and I can't find my way around. I know she's in one of these 3 or 4 units they've got, and they're big. They're big buildings, and each building's got several different apartments in it, and there's probably 4 or 5 buildings. I don't remember the count on how many, but there's several buildings there, and I'm trying to figure out like which building is it, and the letters and numbers, the doors are gone, the windows are blown out. At one point, there's actually a U-Haul truck that's stuck inside of one of the buildings. There's a car down in a pond, another car flipped up on its edge, and I can't see anything. I don't know where I'm at. I've got my phone flashlight. I'm trying to find my way around, and I realized at that point how devastating this storm was as a tornado swept through this town. Looked back across and I could see in the flashes of lightning that the Walmart was gone, and honestly at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon on a beautiful day in May, that store would have been full of people. You could look down on the Home Depot, it was gone, the apartment complex was gone, and you just think about, man, the people who were driving that busy street on that day. I got back in my truck and I drove home. I didn't know what to do, just went home. Turn on the news and they start talking about the fatalities and the casualties. They start talking about, please don't come into town. It's terrible. Don't come into town. We've got this under control. And I sat there for about 2 days trying to figure out what to do. Trying to figure out, man, at some level, do I risk it? I mean, what do we do? Finally, I said, man, we've got to do something. I can't just sit here. So I'm like, forget everything I'm hearing. I need to get in town and we need to see what we can do. These are our neighbors. These are our friends. We need to respond. And the job that I got was a little bit interesting. I got associated with this group of people, and I ended up getting this weird job where I would actually go and search grid blocks doing, we'll just call it cadaver searches. That at some point, their hopes of finding people alive were beginning to diminish, and so the crew that I led were actually looking for cadavers, for bodies. Pulled up, the very first time I jumped in the back of this truck, they drove me out to this area by a place, by the hospital. Hospital's just now devastated, 4 or 5 stories. I don't remember how high it was. I know I'd been driven past it 100 times in my life, had been all around it. This hospital standing there and all the windows are blown out. There's nobody in this hospital anymore. It's completely, it's uninhabitable at this point. Nobody's even in it. At that point on 4 o'clock on that same Sunday, there have been moms who had just given birth. There have been people who just had surgeries. There were, people that were sick in the ICU, that 4 or 5 stories of people packed in this hospital completely full, and now it's completely empty. And I'm sitting there looking over here in the parking lot. I see gurneys and I see gauze with blood all over it. And I see piles and piles of just blood-soaked bedding, mattresses laying out there where they had literally hauled the people out of the hospital into this open parking lot and were trying to somehow do triage and surgery on people who are already wounded and hurt and sick. And I stood in that parking lot, I just looked. I'd just come back from a grid search. I think I'd done 2 that day already. We came back into this little parking lot, and the rain was starting to come in. It was a very chilly day now. The weather front had changed. It wasn't like it was outside. It had switched from being at 80, 90, 100 degrees to now it's really pretty cold. And the cold front's moving in, and the rain's starting to drizzle in just a little bit. And there's about 60 of us sitting out there that day in this little parking lot, looking out of the hospital, waiting on our next grid search. Some people from the local church had made these cold cut sandwiches for us, brought them out, and we were just sitting there munching on these little sandwiches, just eating away. 60 of us just waiting for our next assignment. And then I look over, and here's this guy standing there. He's kind of leaning up against this bus. He's got a big old thick long beard. I don't know how old he is. I heard him talking because he had a really loud voice. And I knew he's a retired firefighter from Kansas City. I don't know how long he'd been retired. He was built like, I don't know if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings. You know what Gimli looks like? He looked like Gimli. He looked like he could just plow over you with no problem whatsoever. I mean, he was just short, thick, and just big man. And just looked really strong. And we're just you ever had that moment when you're with a group of people and there's a lull in the conversation? I know there's some sort of like psychological, sociological phenomenon that happens when everybody just kind of goes quiet. Well, that happened with 60 of us at what really seemed like an inopportune time. The whole crowd just kind of goes silent, and then Gimli's voice, that's not his real name, I don't know his real name, it carries out. And what I hear him say over the crowd in that moment with 60 of us just sitting down, thunder, lightning around us, storms starting to come in again, eating these cold cut sandwiches, freezing cold, Gimli's voice carries, and I wish I could tell you exactly what he said. I wish I could say it in the way that he said it. But I don't think it's worth the shock value. I don't think that me saying expletives from stage are really an appropriate thing to do in this environment. But I'll tell you what, man, it was a holy moment. Because we're sitting there, 60 of us, eating these little sandwiches. Gimli just kind of blurts out in this moment of lull, this moment of quiet when no one's talking. He blurts out this phrase. He says, man, if it wasn't for the, and he threw out a word that you usually don't associate with church. You just don't, okay? He said, if it wasn't for the, and he said a word, church, I don't know what this town would do. And everybody's head just turned and looked at Gimli. Like, one, are we shocked by the fact he's cussing, or that he's cussing right before he says the word church? 60 people just turn and look at Gimli. And he looks at all of you and says, man, I'm telling you, man, another expletive, church is getting it done in this town. And everybody's just kind of eating sandwiches like, we're waiting for lightning to strike Gimli right now. We're like, whoa, man, can you say that word with church? He says, man, I'm not kidding. And he starts saying specific churches with expletives. That church, and I don't want to say it, they're getting it done, man. I'm like, and at that moment, I felt, literally felt the Holy Spirit well up inside of me. Felt tears coming to my eyes, man, just goosebumps up and down my heart, up and down my arms. Not my heart, that'd be weird, but goosebumps up and down my arms and just well with emotion about the way that this man spoke about the church. Because I think that's what we're created to be. We talked last night in this room about the fact that we are shackled with chains. Shackled by the fact that we've got sin. And we know that there is no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. We know that the enemy tries to shackle us with guilt. And we spend so much time thinking if we can just somehow muster sin management in our life, if we can just break these chains, experience freedom, and if you can just not go back to pornography, not go back to sleeping around, if you can not go back to lying, if you not just go back to foul language, all the stuff that I can't pick enough sins in this room to cover everything you're dealing with. And we sit here in this moment and we think if we get these chains free, we're just fine. And I think our enemy just laughs. I think he laughs. Because we're so focused on the chains on our wrist that we fail to notice that what he did in the same time, that he might have taken them off our wrists as he wrapped them around our feet. Because church, what we become is a group of people who are so worried about behavior modification, we're so worried about the things that we don't do, that we forgot what we were called to actually do. And what we find in this day and age, what we find in this culture is that we struggle, not just with rebellion. We don't struggle with just rebellion, we struggle with resistance. We struggle with this moment in our life that we're called to do good and we just don't do it. Paul puts it this way in Romans 7, he says, man, the bad things that I don't want to do, man, I do them anyway. But Paul talks about another part of this battle that we fail to acknowledge. It's not just the bad things over here, man. It's not just the bad things. It's not just the sinful things. It's not just the shackles on our wrists. Paul says, and man, the good things that I know I should do, those things I don't do. And I think in this day and age, if I could tell you, one of the tactics of the enemy is he's got you so convinced over here that your goal is to just not sin. Just don't sin. And he's got you so consumed with somehow changing your behavior over here that he has now immobilized the church to where we are no longer men and women and a body of believers who move with action. In church, he's kicking our butt in that game. I want to talk to you about that today. We're going to camp out a little bit. We're going to get to 1 John eventually. But what it looks like in my life is I hear a need. I hear a need, but I just don't respond. And you know what it's like when you hear that someone's suffering. You hear that someone's experienced a death in a family. You hear that someone's going through a hard time. And what we do over here and what shackles around our feet look like is we hear about that need. We hear about that issue and we say things like, oh man, that's so bad. Oh man, that's a bummer. Oh man, I hate to hear that. Oh man, that breaks my heart. And we have conversations with one another all day long about how bad it is for that other person. While they sit over here in the house of the hurting, in absolute silence, wondering where is the church? The house of the hurting is silent. But over here is a deafening voice of people saying, we don't know what to say. How ironic it is that we will say, we don't know what to say, when the one thing that we really need to do is show up and talk with them, show up and meet them in their need. Now, my wife is just fine, so don't let this next part freak you out. Every time I tell this story, she's like, you gotta tell them right. My wife is fine, okay? But we went through this in our family at one point. I remember the day my wife was diagnosed with cancer, okay? She's fine. Don't freak out on me. My wife is diagnosed with cancer. And for one point in time, we didn't know what was gonna happen. We're waiting the results. The pathologist in our town said, man, this is difficult. I don't know what to do. He had to send off to Mayo Clinic. We're waiting for like 2 weeks to find out what she's got. And what we know is this cancer is incredibly easy to cure or it's absolutely incurable. It's one extreme or the other. There's no middle ground. I remember sitting there, man. I got 3 kids. My wife is going through radiation, and so she is being sequestered off by herself. I remember every day, I had a few people that came to visit me, but I had 2 best friends in my life. 2 people that I counted on. You know how many times they came to visit me in that period of time? How many times they showed up at my house? I remember 2 years later, I had to forgive them. So I took them both out for breakfast separately. And I had to look at them, I was like, man, where were you? Where were you, man? Like I'm going through one of the most difficult points at that point, one of the most difficult moments in my life. Where were you? You say you're my best friend. Where were you? You didn't knock on my door. You didn't call my phone. You didn't even check on me, man. And the response was this. Oh man, I didn't want to bother you. Man, I knew you had a lot going on. I knew you had your hands full. I didn't want to get in your way. I was like, get in my way, man. You claim to be a friend. You claim to be a fellow believer. I needed you. Where were you? Their feet were shackled. It's not just them, though. I do the same thing, man. It's easy for me to pick at them. I do the same thing. I hear somebody's hurting. Family's going through a difficult time. So maybe you do the same thing I do. Is I think somebody else has it, says everybody. Somebody else is surely gonna take care of this. Somebody else is surely gonna follow up on this. And what ends up happening is all of our feet are shackled and we all think that somebody else will deal with it. Somebody else will look into it and nobody ever does. And the brokenness continues. You know, early on when we were formed in the garden, one of the first things that God made us to do, one of the first tasks that we were given was to work. Work is a part of our DNA. Some people have this misconstrued understanding that, we only work because we sinned. That's baloney, that's heresy, that's wrong. We were made to work. We were created. That's why we have these muscles. It's why we have these fingers, these hands. It's why we have this vocal cord. It's why we can have this interaction. We were made to be productive. When you find yourself in a place where your only end game spiritually is sin management, you lose your identity. Don't allow your feet to be shackled, church. You were made to move. You were never made to just sit there. I think love risks it when everyone else fears it. Early on in the history of the church, there's a couple times it comes through. Rome is really, the early church no doubt gets going in Jerusalem, but there's a moment in Rome where the church really starts getting some anchors down deep. It begins growing rapidly. And in Rome, at one point at AD 150 and another time, AD 165 or so, at another time in AD 250, a couple of things happened. And that's a long time ago. Back before you've got hospitals like we've got today, back before you've got antibiotics and all the different ways we can cure, when the disease swept through the region, bad things happened. And in fact, in AD 165, measles, smallpox, sweep through the Roman Empire. Sweep through. Literally, people just dropping dead left and right. It happens again in AD 250. It happens again in AD 350, AD 250. It goes all the way from Ethiopia all the way to Scotland. And they think it's smallpox at this point in time. And they're dying at the rate of 2,000 people a day in Rome. 2,000 people a day, bam, bodies hitting the floor. Dead people left and right. They're literally burning bodies, stacking them up, hauling them off. But a crazy thing happens in that moment. Because pagans, people who aren't believers, they don't want to get sick. So you know what they do? They bail, man, they go, they're gone. They leave town. And they leave their grandmothers, their mothers, their children, their aunts, their uncles, their brothers or sisters. They leave them behind. They shut them down because they don't want to touch the people that are sick. They don't want to get it, so they leave and they're gone. And the Christians do something different. When all the pagans, all the non-believers leave, the Christians stay. They stuck it out, man. We've never been a group of people that run. And in fact, Diogenes says these words. You can open on the screen. This was his quote. He says, most of our brothers and sisters showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need, drawing on themselves the sickness, cheerfully accepting their pains, transferred their death to themselves, and died in their stead. So that death in this form seems in every way the equal of martyrdom. We don't come from a bloodline of people who live with their feet shackled. We come from a bloodline of people who meet people in their darkest moment, whether it's a tornado or smallpox or cancer. We meet people in their struggle. And if you find yourself immobile as a believer, then I believe the enemy is using another tactic on you. And he's got you so busy thinking if you don't look at porn, you've got it all figured out. Well, at the same time, what he's doing over here is wrapping your feet in chains and creating in you the inability to respond. I think Jesus knew what was going to happen in the Roman Empire. And that's why when Jesus says these words in Matthew 28, I think it made a whole lot more sense to them in Rome than maybe it does to us. I think it meant more to them because the point is that, man, sometimes it's just the simple things you do. It's not like this overly complex thing. Sometimes, honestly, to keep somebody alive, it's just simple things to take care of them. Because when your pagan relatives have all bailed on you and you can't get out of bed, what you really need is someone to show up, and maybe put a wet cloth on your head to lower the temperature, to maybe they get some water inside of you because you're dehydrating, to maybe take a little bit of soup and literally pour it into your mouth so that way you can actually get some nutrients to keep your body alive. And when Jesus wrote these words, the Roman Empire, the early church saw this scripture so much more powerfully than we do. Matthew chapter 28, chapter 25 says, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. See, the crazy thing is that among pagans, they died at a rate of 50% in Rome. 50% of everyone who stayed died. Among Christians, the rate was about 25 or 30%. And people are like, well, man, it was a miracle that God healed them. I don't know if it's a miracle as much as it is they had people looking after them, man. They were a body of people who cared deeply for one another. So let's drive to our text today. 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 to 18 says this. And this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or in speech, but with actions and in truth. I think first of all, I want you to see that Jesus was willing to risk it. Jesus is willing to risk it. And of course, the first thing that we want to do when we think of Jesus risking it is we want to jump immediately to the cross. Boom. Immediately, we picture Jesus hanging on the cross, crown of thorns, dying in our place, covering our sins in his blood. But I want to encourage you, man, don't jump to the cross too fast here. See, Jesus risked it long before he ever went to the cross. Jesus lived a life of laying it down. He lived a life where he was always willing to risk it. I mean, you think about that moment when he shows up and he leaves the grandeur of heaven, the greatness of heaven, in order to allow himself to be placed in a manger. You talk about willing to risk it? Some of you guys look at this because you can read the back half of the book and you think, oh man, Herod was never actually gonna kill him. Oh yes, he was gonna kill him. And honestly, what will happen to him on the cross, those thorns, they don't somehow hurt less, and God doesn't somehow numb his nerve endings because he's God, Messiah. When the nails go through his wrist and through his feet, it's incredible pain. It's why Satan goes after him and tries him to get him to bail and abandon this mission he's on. But Jesus was willing to risk it. He's willing to risk it when he shows up at 2 o'clock in the morning on the shore and some crazy naked demoniac full of demons come raging at him. I'm telling you, man, I would throat punch that guy. I'd be throwing rocks at him as he's coming at me naked. You run at me naked at 2 a.m., I will take you out. Not Jesus, man. You think about the risk. They couldn't even bind this guy with chains. He would break the chains. He's cutting himself with stones. He's living among the dead. Jesus meets him. This woman that nobody else would touch because she's got a physical problem inside her body that the doctors can't solve. Know what? She is an outcast. Jesus wanted to risk his own safety and even call her daughter. She touches him, she's healed. He takes time for her. Jesus risked it long before the cross. He's willing to risk everything for you, everything for me. He lived a life that risked it. We should do the same. We should risk. If you look at verse 16, it says that we should lay down our lives. That term means a continual laying down. In other words, lay down our lives. The verb tense of that means it's an ongoing thing, like we would actually do it daily. You know, our love for God, like we learned yesterday, is shown in our obedience. But our love for other Christians is shown in our sacrifice. And if your spiritual life, listen, if your spiritual life isn't costing you something, you don't understand what it means to walk with Jesus. If you're not sacrificing for other believers, if you're not giving up of your time, of your resources, of your livelihood, if you're not giving up of your effort, if it doesn't cost you anything, I'm telling you, you don't understand this Christian life. It is not just about sin management. It is also about going and caring and loving and doing. Love means that we have a readiness to respond to anything for other people. I don't know if I was in Vietnam or China. Took a trip. I can't remember where I was, but I remember meeting this guy. This guy looked at me, and I was just talking with him. Honestly, I think it was Vietnam, but I think we were in Hanoi, but I don't know where I was. Having this conversation, and this guy, I look at him, I go, man, why are you here? Because he told me his background, kind of like where he grew up, his business, his education, and I'm like, why are you here? I don't get it, man. What are you doing in this town? Like, you're a successful businessman. Why have you relocated this town? And why are you like teaching young kids in a school? And he looked at me, he's like, because it's my responsibility. He says, do you know when it's your responsibility? I mean, how do you know if something's your responsibility? You hear about a need. You're like, well, am I supposed to do that? Or maybe somebody else supposed to take care of that. I don't know if I should do it. Here's a simple way to know if it's your responsibility to care for the needs of another person. It's a simple definition. It's not gonna be anything fancy or new. He said, man, it's my responsibility. He says, do you know what it means to have a responsibility? I was like, I think I do. And he goes, it's simple. When you see a need, do you have the ability to respond to that need? Kind of cocked my head sideways like, yeah, it's a simple question. Whether it be money, time, conversation, whatever it is, do you have the ability to respond? If you have the ability to respond, then it is your responsibility. When you see somebody in your home, somebody in your community, somebody in your church that's broken, and you acknowledge that, and you know that you could have an impact, you know that you could serve, even if you know 1,000 other people who could do a better job than you, if you can do it, it is your responsibility. We spend so much time thinking that somebody else has got it covered. The truth of the matter is nobody. Nobody's doing it. I love this next thing that he says in this text. John says this. He says, before he says this, greater love is no one than he would lay down one's life for friends. John makes this comment. He says, brothers or sisters. That phrase caught me. If you throw up on the screen real quick. It talks about brothers, lay down our life for your brothers or sisters. Check this out real quick. A couple things I want to point out in this text real quick that I think are important. Brothers and sisters is a really unique phrase that he's using there. A lot of times we wonder, who is my brother? And someone's really like, man, everybody in the world is my brother. I care about everybody. That is not what John means here. We go immediately to the story of the Great Samaritan. I love everybody. And there's no doubt that there's a call in our life to care for everyone. But that's not what John is doing here. That word, brothers and sisters, and when he says it, he says it plural to start with, and then later on, we'll talk about this in a second, he goes to singular. Brothers and sisters is a very unique phrase. It's unique to this, and it means something very specific. What John's talking here is not everybody in the world. John's not talking about all the others, and I struggled with this, honestly. When I thought about what he meant in this text, what John literally means in this text, brothers and sisters are the people sitting in this room with you right now. It's people you already know. It's fellow Christians. It's why Paul will say in Galatians, he'd say, hey man, listen, do good to everybody. Do good to everybody, but especially those who belong to the family of believers. There should be a difference in the way that you care for other Christians. Now listen, man, I could preach a sermon all day long about the importance of caring for the immigrant, for caring for the outsider. I could preach sermons all day long about caring for this group or that group. I could do that, but that's not what John's talking about in this specific text. In this specific text, he's saying that we have a responsibility to care for our fellow believers. The people we go to church with, the people that we do life with. This is a very restrictive phrase. He's saying, man, if you see a fellow Christian in trouble, you've got to care for them. And I'll be honest with you, man, to be mean to anybody is cruel. To be mean to anyone is cruel. To be mean to another Christian is monstrous. It's evil. You're gonna spend eternity with a person. You're gonna walk, they are created in the image of God. He has stamped his identity, his heart. And in fact, you're gonna walk the streets of heaven with this individual. How in the world could you condemn them? How in the world could you make fun of them? How in the world could you somehow tear them down for your own gain? How in the world could you dismiss them? How in the world could you look across and think because they're of another race, another ethnic group, because they come from another culture, that somehow you're better than them? These are your brothers and sisters in Christ. You're called to love them. There's no margin among believers. No margin for class, no margin for a caste system, no margin for the people who are better and the people who are lower, no margin for seniors being better than freshmen, men being better than women, black being better than white, no margin for any of that. We are all one in Christ Jesus. And as brothers and sisters, you are called to love. And I'll be honest with you. You should treat the people inside this family extremely well. Paul says it, especially those who belong to the family of believers. What John's saying here, when he says brothers and sisters, if you see a fellow Christian in trouble, you've got to respond. See, so many times we look at that phrase, brothers and sisters, and we see all the issues in the world. Man, there's so many issues. I don't know if I can deal with all of them. There's so many needs, Jayson. Where do we start? Well, it's interesting what John does there. Put that back up real quick. What John does there is interesting. He goes from plural to singular. See, sometimes we will spend so much of our time trying to love everybody that we don't actually love anybody. And what John says is, man, let me take this from this big plural, this big, huge umbrella of all the brothers and sisters, and let me boil it down to an individual. If you see another girl or another guy in your youth group, in your church, a fellow believer in your town, another human being that you can actually know their name and look across at them, you have the spiritual responsibility to respond to that. And I love what we're doing. And I'm not somehow diminishing. Please understand, I gotta be true to this text. I'm not trying to diminish the work that we'll do with all kinds of groups that are struggling, hurting around our world. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm not saying ignore all of that. But I am saying there is a spiritual responsibility we have to care for other believers. And we have to own that again. and I feel like we've lost it. I love what it points out. Here's what it looks like when we do that well. All the believers were together, had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. And then jump down to the very end. It says, and the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. Here's what happens. When we as a church learn to love well, it's attractive. The Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. When this stuff was going on in Rome and people are dying of smallpox and measles, you turned and you looked at Christians and you said, man, look at how they care for one another. And all of a sudden the Christians would say, let us take care of this pagan as well. Let us take care of this person. And when all their family had abandoned them, the Christians came in and responded. And people were drawn to that. Here's what I'm not calling you to do. I'm not calling you to start a club where you're known by the monikers on your shirts. I'm not calling you to start a club that somehow, we're in the inside group, they're on the outside group. I'm not calling you to start somehow a little Christian clique. What I'm calling you to do is transform your culture. That when people from the outside look at you, they would say, anytime I go to that church, man, I know if I had a need, they would have my back. I know if I was going through difficulty, they would be there for me. And I'm not trying to create a place where it's us versus them, but I'm saying you should have a culture that's so contagious that when visitors come in and they look at the way you love each other, they look at the way you talk to each other, they look at the way that you've got each other's backs, the way that nobody in this group would backstab each other, that way if anybody in this group had a need, they know it'd be responded. And what does that look like? It means that when your buddy, when his grandma dies, you show up to the wake and you're there to support him. What does it look like? It means when you get a friend that's a part of this youth group and they can't afford to go to move and you know that you can sell your Xbox or whatever it is so they can be here, you sell it. It means that when you see a family that's going through crisis, you show up, man. You show up with feet. You get the chains off and you show up in their time of need. That's what it looks like. Doesn't everybody want to be a part of a community like that? It's not meant to be a clique. It's not meant to be closed. It's meant to create a culture that people want to be a part of. And that's why the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. But I think what John says in verse 17 can be true of us if we're not careful. He talks about having no pity. The word pity means a closed door where it's locked. And here's what I'll just say, man. There's about 4 or 5 different ways to understand the phrase love of God. I'm not even gonna get into that. I'm just gonna say it. When you see a fellow believer in this room or in your church that's going through a hard time, and you just lock your heart and you don't deal with it and you don't address it, I'm just gonna say John's word. Is the love of God even in you? James says this, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says, go in peace, be warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it in the same way? Faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. John says something interesting in that text. He says, let us love, not in words or in speech. I'll put it this way, let us love. Not just by the fact that we like to give lots of hugs to people. Let us love not by the fact that we text little emojis that have hearts on them. Let us love not just because we say a few nice things on Twitter or we send a Snapchat. What I would say is let's take a break for the next 30 days and stop using our mouths to express our love for our fellow believers, and let's actually move into some sort of action. Because we've gotten so good at running our mouths and we'll stand over here telling people all day long, I love you, I love you, I love you, but our feet are shackled and we never show up where they have a need. We never show up in their moment of pain. And I'm saying at some point, I know words of affirmation are important and I know saying nice things, and I'm not trying to marginalize it. I'm gonna swing this way too far. I know that, cut me some slack. But I think at some point, we need to shut up and show up, man. At some point, we just need to shut up and show up. Like, actually be there for people. Stop texting emojis that show little prayer hands and actually drive over to their house, knock on their door and say, can I pray with you right now? Show up, man. Shut up and show up. Just for the next 30 days, just stop talking about how much you love people and actually do something. Remove the shackles from your feet and move by the power of God. And it's gotta be more than words. A new command I give you, love one another. John 13. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you're my disciples if you love one another. They will not know you're disciples because of the size of church you go to or don't go to. They will not know you're disciples because you've got a hip youth pastor or really cool youth sponsors or a great youth building. They will not know you're disciples because of the music you listen to and the fact that you wear some Christian t-shirts. They will not know you're disciples just because you claim to go to this church or that church. They will know you're disciples by your love. And your love is manifest, not just in words or in speech, as John says, but in actions and in truth. How we doing, church? How we doing? Because I feel like we've gotten a whole lot better at running our mouths than actually showing up in the lives of people. For me, it reminds me of, I've got a son that likes to play Fortnite. Anybody here play Fortnite? Any Fortnite freaks in the house? Should I just jump up and do the orange justice real quick? That ain't happening. My son plays a little Fortnite. He likes to think of himself as a legend. He's got like 170 kills, which I think is ridiculous. Or victories, sorry, 170 victories. I'm like, that's a waste of time. But I will say this, he still was graduated with a 3.95 and 30 hours of college already done and went to state in golf, so I need to shut up and cut him some slack. He got it done. But I go downstairs just to hang with him sometimes and I'll watch him play this game, Fortnite. And it's pretty interesting. And I always like it when you're like in squad mode. You know what I'm talking about? If you don't know what Fortnite is, don't worry about it. I'm having a private conversation among some friends right now. Let's show me real quick. Fortnite people, raise your hands up. Don't be bashful. Let's see them. Come on. Don't act like you don't. Okay. Who's got more than 170 victories already? All right, we see you. You know when you're playing Fortnite and you're playing squad mode and you get in this squad mode and like all of a sudden, you know, it's going great, and all of a sudden you get tagged by some moron, you know, that's some noob, just somehow, you know, he hits you with a bomb or, you know, snipes you from a distance, and all of a sudden, you know, you're down on all fours crawling around, you know, and all of a sudden your buddies come around and they start doing the orange justice, you know, or they're doing all the little stupid little dances around you, and you know your buddy's got mats, okay? You saw him pick up the slurp. You know he's got it. He's got a med kit. He's got bandages. He's got everything you need, and he's doing the stupid dance around you. And you're like, bro, help me out, man. He's just watching your time tick away. He's watching you crawl around the floor. You're like, bro, help me out. Sometimes I wonder if Jesus thinks the same thing about us. That we have material possessions to help a fellow believer, and we hoard them for ourselves. And we dance through this life as if everything's okay, knowing that our fellow believers are in deep difficulty and we don't respond. You know what you want to do to the guy that does that in Fortnite? You want to rage on him, okay? You wish it was like 6 months back where you could actually like take out your partner, okay? It's not like that anymore. But you're just ticked off right now, like, bro, come on. And I think sometimes the Holy Spirit looks at the church, and when he sees people who are unemployed, he sees people, single moms that are going through difficult times, he watches day in and day out as this woman who served faithfully in your church has now moved into a nursing home. She's got no family in her area, and nobody comes to visit her. And he's going, man, you have the time, you have the resources, you have the response and the ability to respond. It's there, man. Do something. And we dance through this life as if it's no big deal, man. How can the love of God be in us? Guys, it's not just about sin management, and I'm not here just to pound on you. I know I rage. I believe this stuff, all right? I'm passionate about it. I'm not mad. I just believe it. And I think that our enemy has shackled our feet, man. We're down over here dancing and celebrating because we don't have chains in our feet. And he's like, that's fine. I'm cool with that. You don't have chains in your hands. Great. I'm just gonna put them on your feet. And we think that just because we've given up porn, or we've given up this, or we've given up that, we've given up whatever dark secret is you, that everything's great. And he's like, that's cool by me. It's like you were like a car, and your only objective was to not wreck. Think about that. If you were embodied as a car, and your only objective is don't wreck, is that the purpose of a car, to not wreck? No, the purpose of the car is to move. The purpose of the car is to explore. The purpose of the car is to serve. The purpose of the car is to get out, to go, to go, to go. You can't reduce your whole life as if just behavior management of sin is all there is to Christian life while you're allowing Satan to shackle your legs over here. You have to move, church. For me, I showed up first of all among a kid named Curtis. I don't know what grade I was in, second, third, something like that. Curtis was chubby and a little odd, but he invited me over to spend the night one night. My parents were not believers. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. We were the family that your parents tell you can't hang out with. That's who we were. My dad would buy kegs on the weekends for the high school kids, and then I would mix drinks for the adults on weekends. That's just how it rolled in our family. It was not abusive. Please don't understand that. My family was not abusive. We just liked to party a lot, whole lot. So Curtis invited me to spend the night this night. I'm like, cool, I'll spend the night with Curtis. Go to Curtis's house. Show up. I'm probably third grade, something like that. Show up at Curtis's house and having a good time, man. He lives in this, kind of like me. I grew up pretty poor. Curtis lives in this dumpy little house in this dumpy little town. But at that age, you don't really care. You just want to hang with Curtis. And so he invited me to spend the night. I'm like, I'll spend the night with Curtis. I don't know him that well, but we'll have a good time. Go over there, and all of a sudden his dad comes home, and we go outside, we play a little wiffle ball, and I'm like, that's cool. Usually my greeting from my dad was, I threw him 2 Budweisers. Curtis's greeting is, here's a wiffle ball and a bat. I'm like, this is different, okay? Where's the Budweisers? That's kind of the way my brain was working. And all of a sudden, we go out and play wiffle ball, we come back in, we're gonna eat a meal, and they all like grab each other's hands. I'm like, how are we gonna eat? Like, they're like holding hands at dinner. I'm like, who does this? I'm like, there's utensils, so I think we're gonna use those. But as a kid, I'm like, I'd never seen anybody pray before. Like, I'd never seen a prayer in my life. This is my first experience at seeing what a Christian family looked like. And they held hands and they like started talking to somebody I couldn't see. And I'd never heard who Jesus was. I didn't know what any of this was. The next day, they invited me to spend the night again. I'm like, that's cool, we played wiffle ball. We ate cookies. I'll spend the night again. So I spent the Saturday night. We got up Sunday morning, and I didn't have clothes to wear. And I'm sure wasn't fitting in Curtis's clothes. So I was like, I'll go to church with them. I didn't know what church was. I'd never been to church in my life. And so I show up this dumpy little church. It's nothing fancy. It's honestly, like, it is just a small little church that probably had maybe less than 100 people at it. And I go into this little classroom and I sit down and we make really dumb crafts, and they had really bad Kool-Aid. My mom made way better Kool-Aid. It was really weak. And I was like, and then we walked into this big room and his dad stood on a stage. We sat on these wooden benches and his dad talked and talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. I was like, shut up, let's play wiffle ball. But all of a sudden, man, I saw this love that this family showed up in my life. And they welcomed in me. My mom, this was her third, she already gone through 2 marriages. The guy that's living with us at that point is just another living boyfriend. I'm not trying to make my mom sound trashy. She was just looking for love in all the wrong places. She just wanted love. 2 divorces, thought this guy was gonna be my dad. He wasn't. Another guy moved in with us for a few months and he left. And then, kind of these guys that I think would be my dad someday. And none of it ever ended up being. And then all of a sudden my dad, the guy who is my stepdad now, he shows up and he stays. But I didn't really know what it meant to have a father. I didn't know what it meant to have a family. I didn't understand it. But Curtis's family showed me that. See, they showed up. They showed up and they took in this kid who was absolutely broken, who I know that I had to be using expletives all around their house. Trust me, I know what I came from. I had to be a rough kid and they loved me, man, and that's what I needed. They showed up, they took me in. And what it looks like for you is that for some of you, you know you've got friends that are broken. Invite them into your home, invite them into your life. Quit just talking about how tough they've got it. Show up, shut up and show up. That's what Curtis did for me. My dad saw a change in me. My stepdad, I call him dad because we're close now, but my stepdad saw a change in me. He didn't know what to do with it. He and my mom, they met in a bar, both drunk. And he says, you know what? We get married, we're gonna go to church. Drunk. I don't know how long they lived together. They came home one night and told me they were married. I didn't get to go to the ceremony. None of us sons went to the ceremony. We just came home and we're like, we're married now. I was like, okay. I remember sitting there and my dad woke us all up one morning. My brothers were teenagers. I was probably 5th grade now, I don't know. He says, hey, we're going to church this morning. We're like, place gonna burn down, man. Like, all right, so we loaded up in the car and we drove to church. We pulled up, parking lot. This is a different church. My dad didn't like Curtis's church. We're going to a different church now, church that he liked. And it was, again, just a small, dumpy little church. Pulled up the parking lot. We all sat there. My dad's like, we're not dressed for this. So we literally turned around in the parking lot and left. Drove up the next week. He gets us up again in the morning. All right, we're going to do this. We're going to church. We all get up. We show up. We pull in the parking lot, park the car. My dad's like, we're a little bit late. We back the car out, and the whole family leaves the parking lot again. Third week, we show up in the parking lot, and we left again. We left the parking lot of the church. We showed up as a family, 5 of us, to this parking lot of this church and left every time. 4th time's a charm. Pulled up in the parking lot. My dad turned off the engine. We walked inside. Now, I was cool with it because I've been going to church with Curtis. I was like, I'm just glad to be going to church. This is great. Can't believe my family's going. We walk in, and everybody's, we give them a rough background. We were thinking, man, they do not know who we are. And they loved us, man. That church, they wrapped their arms around us. They cared. They met my mom, and they talked to her. We weren't just visitors who walked through. They showered us with love. In fact, that night, they invited us over for homemade ice cream. And who doesn't like homemade ice cream? We had homemade ice cream, and we started meeting these people. And it wasn't but maybe a week after that or so. I lived out in the country. We had no neighbors, and we didn't have like trash pickup. So some of you might be offended by this, but it's just how you did it like a long time ago. We had this huge metal barrel, 55-gallon drum. It's a big barrel, and you put your trash in it, and that's how you had to get rid of your trash. There's no trash pickup. You just burned it. Yes, great for the environment. But you burned it. It's just what you did. There was nobody coming to get it. So my job was to go out and burn the trash. Probably about a week or 2 after we'd gone to this little church. I went out there one day, struck the match, lit it on fire, went back in the house. I'd done that 100 times. More than 100, hundreds of times. And I walk back inside. I'm taking a shower. I don't know what we're going to do that night, but I jump in the shower, and my mom starts yelling. She says, Jayson, there's smoke. Jayson, there's smoke. There's a fire. I'm like, what? And I'm jumping out of the shower and, trying to put, clothes on when you're all wet. That's fun. And I take off running out of the house, and I turn the corner, and I look, and I can see, like, we live way out in the country, out in the middle of the woods, and I can see the woods are on fire, man. Woods are absolutely on fire in that moment. And I'm like, oh no, and I grab the hose and I turn it on, I take off running, and bam, I run out of hose, and I'm trying to squirt it, but I'm about like 30 or 40 yards from this flame. I'm not even close. And I'm looking, the leaves, the oak leaves have caught on fire, and they've burned underneath my brother's car. It's a 55 Chevy, 2-door hardtop. Beautiful car. He's in the process of restoring it. He just redone the engine. All he had to do was get a paint job. He's gonna take it to college. It's gonna be this great thing. And I look, and the leaves underneath this car are all on fire, and the tires are now catching on fire. And about that time, the gas tank just explodes. And I'm like, no way. And we weren't rich, man. We were poor. My dad was a construction worker. He's off building a house. And I look, and I'm like, man, if this fire moves over, it's gonna catch all of his outbuildings. He's gonna lose all of his tools. We're gonna lose our livelihood. And I turn and look, and I'm like, man, the leaves are gonna catch our whole house on fire. We're gonna lose our home. And I run back inside. I'm like, Mom, we're in trouble. You gotta get a hold of Dan. That's what I called him then. You gotta get a hold of Dan. We need help right now. Well, this is way before cell phones and pagers. There's none of that. My dad's, this is like back in like late 70s type stuff. Did not get a hold of him. My mom knew where my dad was working. And she remembered that she met this lady at the church. Her name was Vicky. And he knew that she lived just up the road from him, from where he was working. About 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. So she jumps on the phone, she dials up Vicky, because Vicky had given her phone number. She says, hey, Vicky, this is Charlotte. I met you at that church. She goes, oh, honey, I know who you are. She said, Vicky, we're in a lot of trouble right now. We need help. Our property's on fire. Dan's just working down the road from you. Do you know where he's working? Yeah, honey, I know right where he's working. Can you go get him? We need help right now, immediately. We need help. She's like, oh, honey, I'll do it. I'll take care of it right away. She hangs up the phone, and she grabs her car keys, and she makes one other phone call. She makes one other call, and she jumps in her car, and she races down the road to where my dad's at. My dad's up on this roof. He's pounding hammers. Vicky comes out. She starts yelling, Dan, your property's on fire. House is on, the house isn't burning yet, but all your property's on fire. The woods are burning. Everything's ablaze right now. And my dad's like, phew. So he starts yelling at all the guys working for him. Guys, just go on head on home. None of them offered to help. They're like, all right, they just all call it a day. He's packing the tools up because, again, we're not wealthy. He can't just leave his tools behind. He's putting them all in the back of this old Dodge truck, trying to pack stuff as fast as he can. He finally gets in his truck, and he races home. gets there as fast as he can, and as he comes up for this long drive that we've got to get into our house, he looks, and he's zigzagging around cars all over our driveway. Cars left and right, trying to get through, trying to make his way. He can see there's still like a little bit of smoke, but he looks and there's cars everywhere, and my mom is standing there, and she's just stirring. She's just stirring this thing of lemonade. And I'm just standing there just kind of talking to people, because the one phone call that Vicky made was to the church. She called the church on that day. And on that day, the church showed up with rakes at my house. On that day, the church showed up and they left everything. They didn't just stand there and say, hey, did you hear about the bad thing that happened in the McGrew family? Isn't that a shame? No, they left their livelihoods. They left their jobs. They left their security. They grabbed a rake and they showed up at my house on that day. They showed up to take care of me, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there, because you were the church. And when we show up with rakes, the gates of hell can't stand against us. We're the church. But our enemy has shackled our feet. We've forgotten what it means to move. We've forgotten what it means to be available for people. From smallpox and measles to tornadoes and fires and cancer. We're people who know what it means to shut up and to show up. When a friend of ours is going through a death in a family. Shortly after that, I think it might have been a day or two, my dad brought a wheelbarrow into our house. We were a crazy family. Not that crazy. Brought a wheelbarrow into our house. We had this big old liquor cabinet, packed with bottles and bottles of liquor. Whole another refrigerator in another outbuilding that was just dedicated to Budweiser. And I watched my dad take every bottle out, and I stood next to him, put them on the wheelbarrow. He pushed them out to that Dodge truck, and he loaded them all in the pickup. And he said, get in. I hopped in the truck with my dad. We drove a little ways away from our house. Chat pile, bunch of rocks. My dad got out. He grabbed the first bottle. Bam, busted it. Grabbed another one. Bam, busted it. One after another, he busted every rock. Every bottle on that day. And what drew my dad to Jesus on that day were people like you, who didn't tweet about it, who didn't FaceTime about it, who didn't just go through this effort of sending out a little text message. They didn't Snapchat. They got in their cars and they showed up in the midst of my pain. And I'm telling you, what you need to do in a generation is start being people who don't just talk about it, who don't just tweet about it. We've got to be people who show up with rakes and love. We've got to be a group of people who meet others in their times of needs, and especially those who belong to the family of believers. And when we do that, we take those chains off our feet. We're being built to what we were made to do clear back in Genesis. We were made to work. You guys have these coins. If you have them with you, if you don't worry about it. I love it when the church will risk it. You've been playing this game all week called Risk It. All week you've been playing this. I'm gonna encourage you to play the game of Risk It a little differently now. You don't need to do it right now. I just want you to focus. I want you to pray about who this is gonna be. But here's what I want you to do in your coin. I want you to write down your name on one side of that coin in a Sharpie. Don't do it now. Don't worry about it. We'll do it later. Write your name on there. And then I want you to think of somebody in your group that you know, that man, if you gave him that coin and you told him to hold you accountable, you're like, oh, brother, I know they'd do it. I'm not talking about the buddy who let you get away with things. I'm not talking about the girl who are like, oh, okay, I'll let it slide. I'm talking about that person in your group that you know when you give it to them, you're like, oh, no, I know they won't let me off. I want you to think of who that person is right now. Who are you thinking? Now, honestly, some of you are going to get like 20 coins. You just kind of trade them out and move them around. It'll be all right. But here's what I want you to do. For the next 30 days, I want you to shut up and show up. And I know that's harsh. I want you to shut up and show up. For the next 30 days, when you get up in the morning, I want you to flip the coin. When you flip it, if it's blank, you're in. There's no name on the side you flip, you turn it, you're in. And you have until 10 o'clock that night to find a way to show up in the life of believers. And that might mean that you think of a single mom who needs a yard mowed, or who needs you to do some babysitting. Or maybe what you do is you actually find out who from your church is in a nursing home and you show up, or you call your church and say, hey man, could I do some cleaning? Or is there anything I can do to help the staff? Is there anything I can do to help this body of believers? Are there any needs in our church that need to be met? And you look for ways to serve the body of Christ. You show up. And if you flip the coin and a name shows up, then you text that person and you say, you've got till 10 o'clock tonight to reply to me, to tell me what you did to risk it. You have till 10 o'clock tonight, and I expect a text from you where you're gonna tell me what you did to risk it today. Church, we've got to love. And we gotta stop loving, thinking love is about using our words and giving lots of hugs. I know there's a place for physical attention. I know there's a place for words of affirmation, but just for the next 30 days, can we just shut up and show up again? Can we just shut up and show up? Can we start being there for our fellow believers who are broken? Jesus, move us with some power. God, I'm thankful. I'm thankful that a lady made a phone call. And I think about my dad being an elder in a church right now. Blows me away. God, I'm thankful for somebody like Curtis who sees a broken kid in a classroom with him and invites me over. And now I get a chance to lead within a ministry like CIY. God, you transform worlds. You transform cultures. You transform churches when we understand the importance of showing up. We don't just talk a good game about our spiritual. We realize a whole lot more than just some sort of behavior modification. God, may we release by your power, by your will, by your spirit, the shackles on our very feet, God. And may we be people who move, built and designed to work, built and designed to lead others to you. God, I thank you for the rescue that my family's experienced because of believers who showed up. Thanks for saving my dad. Thanks for saving my mom. Thanks for saving me. Thanks, Jesus. I love you. In my prayer.